tail wear, and I thought, well, this was very appropriate. And somebody hollered, "Hotty toddy," as soon as they saw me, so I was in good company.
I think you were.
Absolutely.
Oh, me. Well, I tell you, there's a lot of Ole Miss folks over there in North Carolina, so they showed their colors.
They did.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
There you go, sir.
Oh, thank you so much.
Maralyn, don't you want some more?
I'm fine, thank you. I drank a
Would
big
you like a
glass
little
just a little
table
while
set
ago.
on, or you gonna hang on to it?
Tried it.
Well,
Great
maybe
as well.
so.
Okay.
You need a little something to put it on.
I got
Yeah.
one.
Well,
Stool,
whatever.
I got it.
okay.
So you got us hooked up. We don't have to talk loud, just talk normal.
Yeah. No, we don't have to shout at anybody.
Except when you say hotty totty.
Yeah, of course.
Kind of loud, you know.
Thank you so much.
This is not a rally on the square. We just can talk normally.
Well, that's one problem I don't have is I'm not hard of hearing, but you know, nearly everybody thinks an older person is.
And I am.
And I have, oh, you
I
really?
have hearing aids, but they don't do much. They don't do what I wish they
You
did.
mean you wear your hearing aid?
Yep.
Not many people do.
That's true too. I know a lot of people that don't, or if they wear them, they squeak and they make all sorts of funny noises. Or my next door neighbors in Washington, Martha used to say, "Bob, take those things off." They're driving everybody crazy.
Well, they've come a long way since.
Well, I bet my daddy, did you know my parents?
You know, I'm not sure.
Well,
that
they
I-
died in 75 at 92. They'd been married 70 years. And he would buy, I bet he bought 10 hearing aids and not a one of them worked. And when he died, I just knew he had just bought one, and I knew he hadn't paid probably but one payment. So I wrote to folks, I called them, and I said, "Mr. Todd, has he paid for this hearing aid he bought from you?" He said, "No, just one payment." I had to send them $1,000.
Oh, my.
But it was out of his money, it sure wasn't out of my pocket. And I gave those to John Williford. Did you know John Williford?
I don't think so.
I
Well,
knew a John Wilbur.
they lived on Lincoln. Marie was his wife's name, and he was a big fisherman. And he was always bringing Mother and Daddy dressed fish that they loved. And so he had sent his only pair to repair, and I let him have his hearing aids, and he used them until he died.
Well, that was a good.
And she
good
brought them
gift.
back to me, Marie did, and I gave them to the Lions Club.
Oh, well,
really?
So they were used.
yeah. Well, I'm thinking I was in school with an Ed Williford. Might have been the-
Well, now he was from Jackson, I believe, Ed Williford,
No,
wasn't he? Tail wear, and I thought, well, this was very appropriate. And somebody hollered, "Hotty toddy," as soon as they saw me, so I was in good company.
I think you were.
Absolutely.
Oh, me. Well, I tell you, there's a lot of Ole Miss folks over there in North Carolina, so they showed their colors.
They did.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
There you go, sir.
Oh, thank you so much.
Maralyn, don't you want some more?
I'm fine, thank you. I drank a big
Would you like
glass
a
just
little
a little
table
while
set
ago.
on, or you gonna hang on to it?
Tried it.
Well,
Great as
maybe
well.
so.
Okay.
You need a little something to put it on.
I got
Yeah.
one.
Well,
Stool,
whatever.
I got it.
okay.
So you got us hooked up. We don't have to talk loud, just talk normal.
Yeah. No, we don't have to shout at anybody.
Except when you say hotty totty.
Yeah, of course.
Kind of loud, you know.
Thank you so much.
This is not a rally on the square. We just can talk normally.
Well, that's one problem I don't have is I'm not hard of hearing, but you know, nearly everybody thinks an older person is.
And I am.
And I have, oh, you
I
really?
have hearing aids, but they don't do much. They don't do what I wish they
You
did.
mean you wear your hearing aid?
Yep.
Not many people do.
That's true too. I know a lot of people that don't, or if they wear them, they squeak and they make all sorts of funny noises. or my next door neighbors in Washington, Martha used to say, Bob, take those things off. They're driving everybody crazy.
Well, they've come a long way since then.
Well, I bet my daddy, did you know my parents?
You know, I'm not sure.
Well, they died in 75 at 92. They'd been married 70 years. And he would buy, I bet he bought 10 hearing aids and not a one of them worked. And when he died, I just knew he had just bought one, and I knew he hadn't paid probably but one payment. So I wrote to folks, I called them, and I said, Mr. Todd, has he paid for this hearing aid he bought from you? He said, no, just one payment. I had to send them $1,000.
Oh, nice.
But it was out of his money, so it wasn't out of my pocket. And I gave those to John Williford. Did you know John Williford?
I don't think so.
I
Well,
knew a John Wilbur.
they lived on Lincoln. Marie was his wife's name, and he was a big fisherman. And he was always bringing Mother and Daddy dressed fish that they loved. And so he had sent his only pair to repair, and I let him have his hearing aids, and he used them until he died.
Well, that was a good.
And she
good
brought them
gift.
back to me, Marie did, and I gave them to the Lions Club.
Oh,
Oh, really?
So they were used.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking I was in school with an Ed Williford. Might have been
Well, now he was from Jackson, I believe, Ed Williford,
No,
wasn't he?
We went to high school here together.
Oh, he was?
Yeah, and I
Well, I knew an Ed Williford from Jackson. Now, they had several boys, Marie and John Williford.
Well, there's a Sharon Williford in town who's a nurse.
I don't know whether they're related or
Oh,
not.
that's the same.
They are all dead now, I think. Every one of them, even the boys.
Okay, let me get you to say your names, just so I know on tape who.
I'm Wilbur Lee Todd.
Maralyn Howell Bullion.
And we're ready to start anytime you're ready.
All right. Well, this really is just to be a conversation between you two and your memories of your time as students on campus, and then anything about life in Oxford. We're going down two paths because one almost leads to the other. When you start talking about the campus, you get into people's lives. And I meant to hand you both these 2 or 3 paragraphs I had written as an introduction, and I will still do so. I simply say our project as envisioned will, with voice beginning, and then from there on as appropriate, that is, a voice as compared to interviewing. The campus is a glorious open space, but never undefined. The grove is there with other buildings scattered, but not randomly, from the core of the academic heart. Come on campus as a child, and you see the world as you would. Wildflowers growing in the grass planted by earlier faculty members. All open world with children coming and going as they please. This is their playground, with offices and labs occupied by their parents. Children were very possessive, especially if the labs included snakes and other exotic creatures. Any idea that you could do anything other than go where you please did not occur to anyone. A place to glory in, indeed a place to be a child. That's my introduction to where we're going, to start it from a children's point of view, because Dr. Norton said to me, write from your earliest memories of the campus. And we were here in the 30s, but we didn't live on the campus until 1940, when we lived in the big house that had been a fraternity house right on University Avenue, before you got to the academic circle. And we had a very lively year there, and Wilbur knew a lot of those people that we were involved with, so including my father. He was the only person I know still living who knew my father, who died in 1954. So let's begin with anything you might want to say about those people in that period.
About your daddy?
Yeah, and about the other people you were involved with in the
Yeah.
Lions Club and the choruses and choirs that you sang in and all that was going on in that period, which was quite a lot. I mean, it was the war years, but people weren't just sitting still here.
Well, my parents moved here in 1929
Mm-hmm.
from Greenville. My father was farming on a big scale and, like most everyone else, lost everything. And there were 5 children. And my mother and daddy decided they would move to Oxford in 1929 so we could all go to Ole Miss and live at home. We didn't have any money, and very few people did at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And our first location was right over here where the Oxford University Methodist Church is now.
Mm.
We lived in a rented house that the Bank of Oxford back then owned, and we could have bought it for $4,000, but we didn't have $100. And I always have loved music. I joined the First Presbyterian Church on Van Buren Avenue in 1936. I was 12 years old. I was born in 1924. I think that makes it right. And it wasn't long when I started in the choir. And also at that time there was a Oxford Choral Club. I don't know whether it was called that or not. But anyway, it was a group of singers that loved to sing and get together and perform. And your dad, Dr. Nichols, was one of them. And that's when I first met him. And then back then, you had quartets. And I had a brother-in-law, my oldest sister, Sarah, who married Newton Johnson, who grew up in College Hill area, community. And he loved to sing. We both sang tenor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did your daddy sing? I've forgotten. Do you remember?
I think he sang tenor too. But
I was thinking he did. Well, anyway, there were some good tenors back in those days.
Yeah.
And so I was in the choir group with your daddy, and also I was in quartets. And we also organized a barbershop chorus in addition to the other music groups. And I love barbershop music. And so I was in quartets. And then back then, a lot of funerals were held in homes. Do you remember that, Maralyn?
Yep.
And we sang in quartets. I remember Tuesday Nelson's.
Mm-hmm.
Nelson was one of them. And we sang sometime in the kitchen, sometime on the back porch, or sometime on the front porch.
Oh.
So I did a lot of that. And of course we sang in the church choir too, loft.
Oh, you're bringing back a lot of good memories. I'd forgotten about the
Well, I don't know. It
quartets.
seems like I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I can remember back then. And that's been a long time ago. Well, anyway, getting back to college, 4 of us did finish at Ole Miss. I had one brother and 3 sisters, and I was the 4th child. And then I have a younger sister who is still living, who's 16 months younger than I, who lives in North Carolina. And then I have one sister that will soon be 98. So I come from some good genes.
Yeah, you do. You sure do.
And my 98-year-old sister told me not long ago that our brother didn't even finish high school, and I did not know that. And I think he did better financially than any of us. He was an entrepreneur.
Sometimes that happens.
And I said, why didn't he finish high school? She said, because he loved the girls, and that was what was priority for him rather than getting a high school degree. I thought that was interesting.
Happens all the
and
time.
he was 15 years older than I, and so of course he tried to be another daddy to me. And I listened sometimes to him. But anyway, 4 of us did graduate at Ole Miss, but I graduated from University High School in 42, And my brother said, do not volunteer. And so that was one piece of advice that I took. And so I went ahead and enrolled at Ole Miss in the fall of 42. And that's what most of my friends did that I'd gone all the way through grammar and high school with. And you know what? The draft took us before we even finished the second semester. And we were sent to Camp Shelby, all of us. But my mother believed in taking every course you could in high school plus college. She was a great believer in education. So anyway, she wanted all of us to take typing. And I didn't want to at that time. I would love it today because I was the only boy in the class. The rest of them were girls.
Yes.
And so anyway, that God and being able to type saved my life because I ended up doing administrative type work in the Army, even though I took infantry basic at Fort McClellan. And most of my friends went over there because the war was really hot about that time.
It was.
And were killed.
Oh, you were lucky.
So I was very, very fortunate.
Yes, you were. Absolutely.
And I came back in 46. I was away 3 years in the service, 18 months overseas, 18 months in this country. And Maralyn, that you and I were talking about, you finished in 44?
Ole Miss 44.
Ole Miss 44. I finished in the centennial year in 1948. And I have my annual right here, my 48 annual. And so you're a little older than I, but not much. But I would have finished in 46, but I was gone for 3 years in the service. So I came back in March of 46, and I started back to Ole Miss. They only gave us credit for that one full semester. And I started in 46, in the summer of 46, and I went summer and winter and finished in 2 years and finished in 48.
Oh, that was pretty good. Finish in 2 years.
Well, I went summer and winter, and I was determined to get that degree.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to be one of the graduates in the centennial year of 1948. And if I recall, when we graduated in May of 48, we lined up at the Lyceum in our cap and gowns, and we marched over to Fulton Chapel. And I think the whole graduating class that year was in Fulton Chapel.
Oh, sure.
There were so few of us. It's just so different today. Well, I was in the School of Business, and I knew nearly everybody by the first name in my area, and most of them that were out on the campus.
Oh, sure.
But how different it is today.
Well,
It's
during the
unbelievable.
war, it got down to about 700 people. It was really
I didn't know what the number was.
well, that was before the military came on campus and filled in some gaps. But it was very sparse for a while.
Yeah, and I
Very few
remember that too. And well, Maralyn, you retrace some of these years in your life, and
Well,
you sort of had a spark of interest when he mentioned the funerals in people's homes, and that was something that
it was.
I
It
don't
was
have any
no.
recollection of. I was too young. But tell us about your time in this same period.
My earliest memory of Ole Miss was living on the campus when my father was finishing up his degree. He had sort of done it piecemeal during the Depression here and there and elsewhere. And we lived in the little green houses that are now where the law school is, the new law school is in that area. And what did we call them? They had a special name for the little greenhouses, but they were all these married faculty people and the children. It was a wonderful time. It was just, we ran all over the campus and just had the whole run of everything. You're talking about the children. That was my earliest memory. And then the golf course was right adjacent. My brothers played golf with the Lovelady boys, and they all became very excellent golfers just because they lived there. brought home all the golf balls they could find and sold them back to them the next day. So it was.
All the Lovelady's ended up being a pro out here at the university golf course for a long time.
Oh, the Lovelady boys were really noted for being great golfers, all of them. But I did not grow up in Oxford. My parents were school teachers, so we lived in Yellowbushy County for most of the young years, and then moved to Oxford when I was in 1938, when I was in the 11th grade. And for the same reason that your father came to Ole Miss, so the three of us could go to get college without having to leave home.
And I didn't live on the campus. Now I was
Well, it was very
joined the ATO fraternity, and I did spend the night out at the fraternity house some, and I spent several nights in the dormitory with some friends. But we lived at home, and we didn't have a car. Very few people had cars.
No, we walked to the
We didn't
square.
think about walking a mile out to the campus.
No, absolutely not.
Night and day.
Yeah, everybody walked.
We got
Everybody,
our
yeah.
exercise.
Yeah. It was a different world. And the same, University High School from 1938 to 40 when I graduated the last 2 years, and that was a wonderful experience. University High School was very unique. It was as Liz well knows, it was very special because they used so many of the student teachers from Ole Miss and actually faculty at sometimes. But following that, most all the town people went directly to Ole Miss. I didn't think about going away except now and then. I would love to have gone away to school, but it just wasn't financially
Well, aren't
possible.
you glad you stayed here?
I sure am. I keep telling people if I had to relive 4 years of my life, it would be those 4 years at Ole Miss. They were just wonderful, and I made some close friends with all Oxford girls, but we were, Martha Wilson, Marjorie Black, Kitty Reed, Dot Keys.
And some of them are still living.
Well, not many. Well, Dot Keys is still living, and
Wilson.
Martha Wilson, Martha Lyles Wilson.
Yeah.
Marjorie's dead, and Kitty, and Geraldine Rothschild, and on and on. The Woodwards, they lived in the big east house on the
Right.
corner, and but those were wonderful years. And then I got into politics when my junior year, and much to my surprise and everybody else's, I was elected student body president, and that was a great experience. It was
That
just
was quite an
fantastic.
honor, Maralyn.
These three friends I was telling you about, Martha and Ruth Sneed and Marjorie Black, were all in the FIMU sorority. So after the election, somehow they got a friend to go out to the bootleggers and get a bottle of champagne. None of us had ever tasted liquor, I don't think. Here we were, these innocent little college juniors, and we had no experience with alcohol. We didn't know what to do with it. They were laughing about it the other day and said, we just kept trying to doctor it up. We'd put sugar in it. I still didn't like it.
Do you remember the bootlegger's name?
Oh, goodness, yes, Johnny. I never went there, but I had friends.
Uh-oh, now tell the truth.
Absolutely.
I don't think you just happened upon becoming president of the student body. If you listen to William Winter, former governor, he had a big hand in it and takes great pride in it.
Well, Will
He
was
deserves all that credit, I don't know, but he takes it anyway.
good for him. Yeah, he was a good friend. He was really, really right there. He should have been president of the student body, but he went off to war.
And the same thing as Will was talking about, all of you were just taken away with no notification. And I started to invite him to come be part of this session, but I said to myself, Self, if you do that, he will take over the whole show. So we'll just save Governor Winter for another time, and he didn't actually grow up.
He'll have lots of memories, absolutely. And he was a BMOC, big man on campus when he was there. He was Mr. Everything. And kind in general, and, just really a wonderful person, even at that age. we felt he was headed for big things. But and that was, the war came along, and we'd go to class, and the next thing we knew, the professor was gone, and somebody else would come in to teach, and then read the newspapers, and classmates had been killed in Germany. And do you remember Roger Tinsley?
Oh yes, I tell you, back in high school, I took 2 years of Latin from Miss Harriet Jackson.
She was great.
Oh, I know Miss Jackson.
And at our 50th University High School reunion, which was the last because it was a lot of work, and the Oxford boys and girls had to put it on. So we said, this is it.
Yes.
Miss Harriet Jackson, our Latin teacher, was the only teacher present at our 50th reunion.
Well, that adds.
And so one time we went to a Latin conference at Blue Mountain College.
Oh boy.
And the road over there was not even paved, it was gravel. And I remember Roger had a little coupe, and I think, I've forgotten, it may have been Jimmy White, and I rode in the rumble seat, or whatever they called it. Was it rumble seat?
Oh yes, they were rumble seats. We had one of those. I'll tell you about that later.
It was a gravel road, and there was gravel flying all around, and dust.
Oh yeah.
And I remember I made 2 tombstones out of cardboard. And I said, is Latin dead on one? No, it's much alive. Don't you see us today? I think I was proud of him. And Roger was driving that little coupe.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, I remember him.
Roger was the first, I think he was one of the first that were killed in the war. Very early on.
So. I remember.
Very early on. The first University High School student, I think, that was killed in the war. But Ole Miss, the women carried on.
That's true, and with great aplomb. That's a big word for it.
Well,
it's very appropriate.
So that was one time the women were in majority like they are today.
They were in majority.
Everything I go, I'm about the only man there, but I love it.
Well, but the social life would have been completely dead, well, pretty much, except that the Army came on campus. The military needed, ASTP.
You know what? When I was in an Army depot going overseas during the heat of the war, I was selected to get in the ASTP. And do you believe it? I came to Ole Miss while I was over there waiting in that replacement depot at Fort McClellan, Alabama.
Huh.
And the only thing they offered was engineering and Japanese. And I didn't have any background or qualification either one, so I said, hello, goodbye, and went back.
Well, they came here to learn engineering. The Army thought they were going to need so many more engineers. As it turned out, they didn't, so the program folded. But we had the advantage of having men on campus.
Yeah.
And we had
So
a big...
you didn't miss us then?
Not too much. An awful lot of women found husbands. But we had a big controversy as to whether the soldiers would fit into our classrooms as regular students and into our activities, or well, they would be on one side of the fence and we on the other. It turned out that old Dr. Dean Guess,
Oh yeah, he used to live right here.
he did the counseling on this program, and he said, well, we may as well just integrate them and let them be a part of the student body. And they turned out to be very valuable, worked with a Mississippian and in student government, and I think a couple of them were, they looked at who's who, and just like...
And they were from all over.
From all over, and of course there was no football during a couple of years. But they had 2 football teams. They had a Company A and a Company B, and they played against each other.
And this was an infusion of life beyond what this institution had ever known. So it had to be a great stimulus, even if nobody really saw that as an outcome.
Absolutely.
That's one time the Northerners and the Southerners got together.
It was a great mixing.
Let me tell you a story.
My
mother, when we first moved here in 1929, my daddy had to start all over, didn't have a dime. and nobody else did.
No, that's right.
And so my mother opened a boarding house, and it started right over here, where the
I
master.
eat in that boarding house.
Did you eat there one day?
Oh, I did
Well,
too.
she
It was
fed-
wonderful food.
She fed 65 people every day at noon.
Unbelievable.
I don't know how she did it.
Unbelievable.
And she kept boarders. I mean, you roomed there, and you could eat all meals if you wanted to. Well, I was going to tell you, so during this time, there was a man from Boston that came to the ASTP,
Uh-huh.
and he wanted to stay at Mother's house. At that point, we lived on Jackson Avenue. And so one Sunday after church, we always got a live Christmas tree. It was about Christmas time, and they smelled so good when you put them up. And so we'd go out and cut the tree from friend's farm, and he was used to just going up town, you know,
Sure.
a city where Boston, I guess it was a city back then, and buy a tree. So I said, Ben, are you going to wear that suit out to get the tree? He said, oh yeah, it's okay. And he didn't know we were going out in the woods, and of course we always found a tree, but we thought, well, go on a little more, and we'll see one that's a little
better,
prettier than
yes.
the other one. I don't know whether you had that experience
Oh, yes.
finding a tree.
Oh,
or not.
yes.
And we had to go through a barbed wire fence,
Uh-oh.
and he snagged his britches on that barbed wire. And his wife, I thought, was going to kill me when we got back, because not only had we been gone about 2 hours, and the family was calling, and she wanted him to talk to them, but he'd ruined his pants.
And back
I
then, they
never
were
forget that.
hard to come by. Those pants were.
Well, you didn't have but about one Sunday pair
That's right.
and one Sunday pair of shoes.
When you go out in the woods like that, you're gonna get full of beggar lice and everything else. So that's
Oh,
part of it as
absolutely.
well. But we
Absolutely.
always did the same.
But the military saved the day, and we graduated in great style. But you talk about that little coupe. My brother had a little Ford, Model A Ford like that, and it had a rumble seat. And Martha Wilson and Ruth Sneed and Marjorie and I were just always together in that little funny car. We'd drive up to the gas station, buy 25 cents worth of gas, and drive all day. You remember the airport
Oh,
down
yeah.
south of town?
6 miles
All right.
south.
There was a little contingent of air people. I don't know what they were doing, but anyway, they were practicing takeoff and landing in these cute little airplanes. So one of them invited us to come out, and so one day, and they'd give us a ride. So we get in the little Ford thing and go out to get in, and one of the guys came over and, all right, who's going to be first? So guess who was? And went over and hopped in the little plane and waving goodbye to all my friends, and they were waving to me, and the thing started taking off. Just me in the plane by myself.
Oh, he hadn't gotten in.
No, he hadn't gotten in.
Oh,
He was
no.
standing out, waiting to hop in as soon as he got the propeller going. So I had no idea that I was in any kind of trouble. But the first thing I knew, all the GIs came running over to stop the plane. They actually guided it over so it would run into a little shed and stop. Otherwise, who knows where I'd be now. But
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, the river.
That's some
anyway, well, that poor fella, he's probably still in Leavenworth.
talking about that.
Whatever happened to him, we just hopped in the little car and left.
Yeah, right, well, it's,
But
yeah, and then,
but we were, there were antics like that kept us going. We didn't need alcohol and drugs.
You remember the College Inn?
Oh,
that was
yes.
on the north side of the square?
Gladys.
Well, I worked there, and we had beer sometime, and sometime they voted it out. Just came back and forth. And now look at us today on the square.
Yes.
But anyway, one night, a friend and I, when we closed up at the College Inn restaurant, I had a sister, this sister that's going to be 98, living in Water Valley at that time. And I said, why don't we hitchhike down to Water Valley tonight and spend the night with my sister and her husband? just to have something different. We were young and wanted to have fun. And so we caught a ride, and the ride took us to the airport. And it was about 11 o'clock at night.
Yep.
Of course, we didn't have any cell phones or anything like that. They were going to be surprised to see us.
Sure.
But we didn't make it. So we got out at the airport, and I said, listen, the first car light we see, whether it's going south or going north, let's flag it down.
Get home.
There we were. It was dark. It was about the darkest time I can remember. And so about 30 minutes, here comes a car going toward Oxford. And we got in. That was the last of my hitchhiking experiences.
Well, hitchhiking was the way most of the students got
I
around
know.
back then. They'd hitchhike all over the...
And they would get picked up because they knew who they
Nobody
were.
thought anything about it. Everybody was safe. There
Sure.
were no dangers that anybody recognized.
Well, Ole Miss printed up some little cards, and it said, thanks for giving an Ole Miss student a ride. And the boys would stick them in the pocket and hand them to people when they
There
got
was
out
some
after they'd had a
story in
ride.
the Eagle not long ago about some fellow that hitchhiked, I think, to Holly Springs. Did you see that?
I didn't remember
I
that.
don't remember the details.
That's,
One overriding theme here that I hadn't focused on before, but is important, and this story goes on not only through your period, but even earlier. I'm thinking back to Mother's friend Bessie Summers, and I can't think of Bessie's maiden name right now.
I can't either, but I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and
Watsy was her daughter, wasn't it?
that's right.
Watsy
That's absolutely
something.
right. And Mrs. Hathorn and all of her brood, and all of these families that moved to Oxford specifically for their children to get a university education at Ole Miss. That was the overriding objective. And I can't help but think it also improved the school systems in town to have that kind of input. But in my mind, that goes back to Bessie's family moving here, and she and William Faulkner were the same age. She talks about their early days in school and some of their mean teachers and how William just wouldn't show up. And she said, I cried every morning going to school, but I never dreamed I could just not go. But William wouldn't show up. And so she has her own funny stories, but it means to me that families really back into the last century have been coming to Oxford for education as much as anything else, and that's that I guess is a dominant factor in the development of this town.
Oh, it sure is. I just think what it would be like without the college. It was,
Well, as one of my friends said, it'd be just like Pontotoc.
well, that's right. Batesville or even Water Valley.
Well, I'm for progress, and I love the students, and I know that's what's making Oxford, but I don't want it to get any larger.
No, let's stop where we are.
No, it's outgrowing a certain
Yeah.
quality that it did.
We're
have.
just not ready for all of this, especially this traffic.
Well, it'll never be ready, but how do you make it more acceptable and workable? That I don't know, but that's the big headache, seems to me.
Now, I went to University High School with William Faulkner's stepson, Malcolm Franklin.
Malcolm and I were very close friends. Malcolm worked for my father for many years and worked with my brother when they were both working for Arthur Guyton. And so we were very close to Malcolm, who was also involved in helping my family in every...
Well, did he ever get a degree from Ole Miss, or do you know, Elizabeth?
I have no idea, and the remarkable thing to me is that my father was so strict about so many things and would not put up with much that was not the way it should be. But he adored Malcolm and put up with him.
I was going to say he would be just the opposite.
I think Malcolm would have
I don't think he ever graduated from high school. He never could pass English, as best I recall.
I'm not
I
sure.
don't
But
know,
now he
is it?
loved cutting up frogs.
And snakes.
And I didn't like that subject, but I made it through. I had to.
Oh.
And I suppose that's why he ended up as my father's assistant for so many years because Daddy didn't say he was good at cutting up frogs. He said he was the
Your
best
daddy
at
needed somebody to,
taking slides, which were a big part of medical education then. I'm not sure that's true anymore, but it was then.
oh,
But
Malcolm was,
a very, well, you had to take Malcolm and what he had to say.
well,
with
there
a
was
grain of salt.
only one Malcolm.
Mhm.
He was one of a kind, he really
He
was. I
that,
loved him. He was
that, and,
good friend of my brother's.
Well, I
Yes,
wrote this story to the Eagle when they first started talking about the anniversary of William's death.
Mm.
And I don't know whether you saw it or not,
I
but
did.
talking about the Lions Club, that was one of my stories. I was president of the Lions Club back in the 50s. I think it was about 55. And we met at the mansion, you remember,
Oh, yes.
in that big room. It's probably the largest room in Oxford at that time for
Why?
social gatherings, and that's where our Lions Club met. And so A.G. Boeing, who was in the music school back then,
I knew
you remember
He
him,
was a friend of mine.
and I guess he knew William Faulkner, and so he approached William because he had just gotten that prize and had a little money for a change, and he agreed to give a $500 scholarship to a music student. And they wanted the Lions Club, because we were the largest service club at that time, and we were very active, to do the legwork, to put on a program at Fulton Chapel. And there was a lady from New York City, Cummins, I don't know how I remember it, was her last name. I think she was a pianist. And we had a concert out there, and we did all the legwork, made all the arrangements, sold the tickets. It was a full house. And A.G. said, I said, A.G., is William coming? Because you know how he was. He might say he was coming, and then you didn't see him. And so he said, oh, yeah, he said he will be there, and he will give the award the $500 scholarship right after intermission. So at intermission, we were all set for that, and A.G. ran over there and saw me, and he said, William says he's not going to get up on the stage. He was sitting right there on about the third row. He came, which was a surprise, but he decided at the last minute not to give the scholarship, his own scholarship. I said, well, I suppose since you started all this, you will give the scholarship for William. No, you as president will have to do it. And I had to get up there and present his scholarship.
Well, I'm sure you did
That
a good
I will
job.
never forget. And afterwards, we had a small reception down at Roanoke, and Estelle was just so friendly and
Very gracious woman always.
yes, and we didn't even see William.
Really? Yes,
He wasn't
Yes,
even
sir.
peeping around the corner, even like he did sometimes. So I don't know where he was. He wasn't at the reception.
well, he apparently had his shy side, huh?
So I'll never forget that
that's a-
time.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I think he overcame that with years and experience and more public speaking than he'd ever done before his winning the Nobel.
Well, I think
yeah.
Jill helped in that respect.
There's no question. And the more I look back on her going with him, as she was determined to do, as Harder, Williams and I both knew that Jill was going to go on that trip. As I thought back on this, I thought Estelle must have realized that she would provide a little control of her daddy and his, keep him on a little more even keel as they went through the few days they were in Europe.
Well, I had wondered why Jill got to, well, they could have both gone, I'm sure, if they'd been,
I don't think Estelle was able to.
she was not able at the time.
I think not, because of course she had all the same problems that
Mhm.
he did. So, but at any rate, Jill went and had a wonderful, wonderful time, and she wrote about it extremely well. The Eagle just reran a long piece by her, and we were all pretty good at what we wrote in both high school and college, and I attribute that to a lot of extremely good English teachers that we had in high school and in college that left us able to.
Mhm.
There are people now that tell me they're just absolutely astounded at the quality of work we did at the school.
The writing is dreadful, I suppose.
Yeah.
Dick Key was an English professor,
Well,
teacher at the high
yeah.
school when I was
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and he was good. In fact, I think I did.
I think I took freshman English under Huey Howelton. You remember
Oh,
him?
I do. He was
Dr.
one.
Hamilton.
Oh, I loved Huey. He was one sweetheart. He died very young, didn't he?
Yes,
Oh,
he
you're
did.
talking about the son.
The son, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
he had.
Junior, I guess he was.
Yeah, I knew he died the year I was editing the
Mm.
student paper because Jim Silver wanted to write a tribute to him, and he did. And what did he have? I can't think of his condition right now. He was the best-looking young man.
He was. He
Yes,
was
I
really
remember.
But
and sweet. I mean, he was just a really nice, good human being. I loved Huey. We had a lot of good times.
It was an unfortunate thing
Yeah,
that his
mm.
life was cut so short. But
No. He did not marry, did he? Did he have-
I don't think.
I don't think he did
Yeah, I
either.
think
He
he
was
just
not
read-
married when I took
at
English
last
from
I
him
knew
after
it.
the war.
Mm-hmm. His sister Martha lived in Florida, the last I heard. I don't know whether she's still living or not.
I don't know. She was a beautiful woman. I remember that. And then I lived
That's,
for a while over in that faculty village where we lived 1 year.
Hmm.
The cottages you're talking about behind the law school.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, those were... Well, that's what those little greenhouses were called. They were called the cottages.
Well, now, it
And that
used
would
to
bring
be
us
called
into-
Veterans Village. Was that after
Oh,
the
that
war?
was after the war.
Okay, that's the way I remember it. I didn't
That's,
remember the greenhouses.
Well,
No,
they
the
were
Veterans Village is on
oh,
the
they were
other
way
side
back
of
in maybe
campus.
Okay.
Veterans
30s.
Village is behind Fraternity Road, going south. So it's on the other side of the campus. In town.
There was an influx of students when that war was over.
Oh,
I
they
remember
must
a
have
lot
been.
of them
Campus
living
must
out
have
in
been
town.
very different after the war.
Well, do you, your memories of your college days, do they extend any further, or is there more you would like to share with us about that period?
We've covered most of the
We've covered some ground.
most of the big things. It was a different era. War was the wartime, and I'm glad I lived through it. But it was interesting. It was just
Well, I can
It's a-
remember the soldiers, in several different respects, they wore their uniforms and they marched to class, that somebody
Mhm.
had decreed that they would behave as cadets at the military academies.
Yep.
And they did. And there's a
Mhm.
film around here somewhere that you've probably seen of a
Marvin
parade.
Hefner was a good friend of mine, and he made the film.
Oh, okay, this is the fellow that
I'm sure it's the one you're talking about.
yeah,
It's,
and it gets shown quite a lot because it shows the parade, I think, coming from town to the Lyceum with floats and all the usual brouhaha, but with many of the military units marching in their uniforms and participating in that way. So it certainly added another whole dimension
I did.
to life on
Yes.
this campus, and one that I hope was welcome. It had to be. There may be people who didn't want it, but
Overall, they were welcome. I think there was some antagonism, but overall they were. And we didn't have classes with them as such. They had their own classrooms, but they would and integrated in the other ways, social life and campus activities, Mississippi and anything else going on.
yeah.
But it was a different period.
I went back
So-
to school under the GI Bill,
Yeah.
and that was one good thing that came out of the war service.
It is, well, this is not relevant to our conversation, but of the major pieces of legislation passed in this nation, that is one of the key and most important bills that's ever been passed. That and the land grant institution that created the realm of universities, which I think was signed by Lincoln and was done in the 1860s. Those two pieces of legislation have done more to advance this country and education than anything else I know of.
Well, I don't think they can do any too much for veterans,
Oh, no.
and I'm all for it. I think they all deserve it all, and especially in these wars we're having today.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it just,
Go get it started.
I know.
Yeah.
It's so pointless, seems like.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you all felt able to do this. It's been
Well, this has been fun.
Interesting to
Brought back a lot of memories I had buried down deep, especially those quartets. I remember George Buffalo.
George
yeah.
Buffalo was
And,
one of them, and we not only did it here, we went a lot of different
Yeah.
places. I remember going on weekends, on Saturdays.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
And you know what? Did you remember that you sat up with the deceased in the homes? Do you remember
Oh, sure,
that?
yeah, absolutely.
I did
yeah.
that many a night, and or at the funeral home.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know what that was about. Do you?
Well, I guess
Why
it was
did
just
they do that?
a little bit of respect and honor, huh? That's,
Well, and to stay with the departed while the departing was in progress.
Well, I'm glad they did
suppose
away
that
with
was
that.
it.
I don't like it. That doesn't
you'd want to sit at the funeral home,
Period.
was it?
I think it was very common in a lot of different societies.
Oh, yes, it was. I have memories of doing that a lot.
Well, the funeral home was on the square, wasn't it? It
Yeah,
was the
right there on
Douglas.
Jackson,
Where Duval's,
right below Duval's store, that two-story
Uh-huh.
building. That was the funeral home until it moved down on North Lamar. Elliott,
I
I
guess
guess,
that was
started down there.
after I'd left. I don't remember it being on the square when the Douglases owned it.
well, the wake and the recognition has always been a big part of our heritage. And one of the stories I heard, who knows where, of the old man who was dying, smelling the ham cooking. He said, "Oh, that smells so good. Can't I just have a little ham?" And somebody answered, "No, it's for the wake. You can't have it."
Oh, poor guy.
Oh,
Everybody had
there were some tall tales
Oh,
told
absolutely,
about
yeah.
2 o'clock in the morning in some of those places.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
sure that's
yeah.
true.
It was a little spooky, too.
This has been fun. If you all feel like getting in your regalia and going at it again, we'll make another try.
Whatever you want. We didn't even get around
I was
to
gonna say,
thumbing through our.
Show me what you want to show me in that.
Now, you,
Oh, well,
is
there's
the
lots
movie
I'd like to
over?
show you, but
You're
this
not
is my
still
campaign.
filming us, are you?
I sure am. I don't know.
Oh, you are?
And there's Maralyn in her younger days.
Oh, Maralyn, boy, you were pretty. And still are.
Well, you're sweet. You.
Yeah, I remember this.
Oh, yes.
You know, your mother was so sweet to my mother.
Who was?
Thank your mother.
Oh, my mother. They were good
Thank
friends. yeah.
goodness my mother never learned to drive. I'd had 2 people to control.
Well, it's a wonder your mother was survived my mother's driving.
Well, one time it wasn't your mother, but I think it was Ms. Black, Ms. R.D. Black, I believe. And they were going to some kind of club meeting over about Avon Acres. And her brakes played out, and they rode all the way out into Avon Acres Park. So the car stopped.
That was a little scary.
But she got in the car with her again.
Oh, well, that's.
But I think Mother was about in every club they had organized here in
Yeah.
Oxford.
Well, the
That
women
may have
were
been the UDCs then. Was your mother?
DAR and the
DAR.
UDC and all the rest of them. Well, that's about the only social life they had. It was just
That's
the
true.
clubs. They just.
But you get out of the house and go do those things. Otherwise, they didn't have.
Well, I was society editor of the Oxford Eagle during my college years. That's the way I paid for my sorority expenses, and it was my job to call the hostesses and say, "Now, who was there? And what did you serve? And who won the prize?" Now it would be so extremely silly but they, the society page was important to them. They had to get their name in the paper for having hosted the DARs and served tea and caramel cake, and it was a
And
big
many
thing.
of us used to read it with great hilarity. We just thought
Oh,
it
it was
the
funny.
funniest material we'd ever come across.
And
Well,
they
I have
had the best silver and
Oh, absolutely.
table,
Absolutely.
linen
It was-
table napkins. And
There are those of us around town that are still doing that, though. I hope
Really?
the
I didn't
practice will soon fade.
Oh, really?
They were great days. They really were. We didn't know it then, but
Well, how long did you do that? All your college days?
just a couple of years, I think. My
What
last
sorority were you in?
FAMU.
Phi Mu, okay. That's what most of your friends.
That it was at that time. That was the Oxford group.
Well, the way I guess I got in the ATO fraternity was through Gene Bramlett. You remember Dr. Bramlett?
Mm-hmm.
And R.X. Williams, who was our mayor.
Uh-huh.
They were both ATOs. Then came along George Street. You remember him?
Oh yes.
Very well.
He was an ATO.
Jamie Whitten was also an ATO.
Oh, was he?
I remember that. I'm glad you brought
Yeah.
that up.
And
Well-
his friend Sam McElwain, who had such a successful law practice in Washington for so many years.
Well, you know, in those early days, in I guess it would have been 46 when I came back from the war and started back at Ole Miss. They would come up during football weekends when the alumni would come to the house. We had just a small house then, nothing like they have today.
Oh yeah.
And the boys would come up to Mother's boarding house, and she would help them prepare all that food for the Saturday alumni group.
Oh,
I remember
that
helping mix up potato salad. And
that was some
and
operation, I'm
ham
sure.
and
Yep.
she made the homemade biscuits,
Oh,
ham biscuits,
Goodness.
nothing like it.
oh, they probably all wanted to flock to the ATO house
Yeah.
because the food was so
Did you
good.
ever know H.M. Ray? Well, he died not
No.
long ago, and yeah, he
must-
was one of there were about 6 freshmen when I started out there in 42. And you know, back then, we haven't even covered this. I just thought of it. They did a lot of hazing back then, you remember?
Oh yes.
They shaved our head, and you'd have to run through the paddle line.
Uh-huh.
They'd come in. Now, I didn't live in the dormitory, but I was out there spending the night with friends one time when they came through about midnight. And we all had to line up in the hall, and they paddled us.
That's,
And they would paddle you sometime during the noon break. So about 6 of those boys that I didn't even know, but we learned to know each other pretty quick,
I
came
bet
up
you-
and lived about 10 days at our house on Jackson Avenue.
Really? That's-
Mother would take in everybody. I don't know where we all slept, probably on the floor. But anyway, they stayed up there to avoid all that hazing. It was
well,
rough.
that's smart because it could get pretty nasty at times.
And I that friendship, H.M. Ray, he's the only one I recall. We were friends up until the time of his death.
Is that right? Well, my husband was ATO and my son's ATO and all the Water Valley boys,
Well, we're kin.
I guess so. But there was such few sororities on the campus then. They were only about 5, I think.
I think that's about all.
Cuyahoga, FAMU, and Todd out. You were
I was a KD.
KD, and yep, they were sort of our big rivals when we'd have intramural sports, and we'd have to put on the raincoats and walk across the campus with our shorts underneath.
Right.
Good.
And there were 2 sororities trying to get established that never had a whole lot of luck, and one was Delta Zeta and one was Zeta Tau Alpha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they would.
And Mother used to try to help. She wasn't a member, but advised the Zeta Tau Alpha girls. And I'm curious. I still get mail addressed to my mother from Zeta Tau Alpha. They have been a long time not cleaning up their mailing lists.
Are they still on the campus? The Z.
Oh, no.
No,
The J's
and the
have
Delta
gone.
Zetas aren't either. My 2
Both of
sisters
those
were
have gone.
Delta Zetas.
Uh-huh.
It was a small sorority.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh. Well,
And
we
the
all got
Zetas
very
were
small
not
back
much
then.
larger.
You just think about, we maybe had 25 members at one point, and the 250 they have today. It's
Yeah,
just
Well, tell me, were the fraternities active during those war years?
pretty much they kept them going. There were enough of the medical students and
And the 4F people.
4F people that
I don't
were
know
not.
when I have used that phrase.
I think some of the smaller ones were able to keep going because the
They-
house that was at then the end of Fraternity Row, which was just before our driveway, the Summers, when they moved to Oxford or back to Oxford, lived and rented that house.
I do remember that. There were some
Yeah,
that
and
did
I
go
can't
on to
think the
maybe
name
just a
of the
few.
fraternity, But they, most of their members were from out of this area, and they just didn't have enough people to keep going.
No.
And I guess they were reestablished later.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. But the Summers lived there.
Well, it was expensive to keep a house up. They only had 2 or 3 members. They
They
just.
didn't have anybody to be able to afford it.
Mm-mm.
And there again, most of the fraternities were relatively small.
Very,
extremely
very small, huh?
compared to nowadays.
No.
Do you remember the Cardinal Club?
Oh, yeah.
Do they still have it? Maybe they
I
don't
don't
call it
think
Cardinal Club.
I think
But
so.
I represented the ATOs
Oh,
one
did?
year as a
Oh.
Cardinal Club.
Oh, my brother, you knew Jimmy.
Yeah.
Well, Jim was
Oh,
from
yeah,
the
of course I did.
IKA. And
I know all your folks.
He was the Cardinal Club. Might have been the same year you were.
What year
No,
was
Jimmy he was 2 years younger than I am. How?
Well, I think he
Were
was
you
a
in
grade
his-
ahead of me, I believe.
was he?
Mary Jane,
Well-
I know was his
Well, they were in the
wife.
same class.
Okay, well, they were
Because
grade
well,
ahead of me.
Jim somehow skipped 1 year. So
Do
he,
you want us to still talk?
What?
I wanted to tell you about my initiation in the Cardinal Club. Are you still filming
Do you
this?
want me to stop?
No, that's okay. If
Well,
you
at the
want
ti-
to.
Okay.
well,
Well,
tell-
anyway, I was the only Oxford boy that year when we were initiated, and you know you had pretty rough initiations in some of those
yeah.
groups. And so they all told me ahead of time they blindfolded us and gave us something that kind of did something to us. We weren't normal.
Goodness.
And we
Didn't know
got
about
on
that.
an open truck bed out here on the campus that late one afternoon. And they blindfolded us and gave us that pill. So they said, now, Todd, you be sure that you see through that blindfold some way or other where they're taking us, because we'd heard some bad stories about it. Well, they took us out to Dr. Gene Bramlett's lake, which I think was out east here,
Yeah.
about 5 or 6 miles. And I was peeping, and they didn't know it. And so I knew where it was because we'd been out there for fraternity parties. Because he was very generous with his place. I think he even lived out there out on a big lake. Did you ever go out there, Elizabeth?
I guess so. I don't really.
So anyway, we got out there, and they said, take off all your clothes, strip down. And you know what they did? They poured molasses all over us, and then poured chicken feed on top of that.
That was sort of like old tar and feathering, huh?
And then they had us to line up, get in a circle, and hold on to each other. And they had built a bonfire. We could tell that. We still blindfolded.
Still blindfolded.
Oh, we had to eat raw oysters too, and I don't like them to this good day. I didn't swallow mine. When I thought they were looking at somebody else, I threw it out in the fire. But anyway, so we had to sing the alma mater, and they left us out there about 2 o'clock in the morning. So as soon as they left and we knew that they'd all gone, everything got quiet, they said, Todd, where are we? I said, I know exactly where we are. We're about 6 miles out of Oxford. Now, what are we going to do, they said. I said, well, I don't know what, except that we better get these clothes on
They left
and
your
get
clothes.
out on the
thank
highway.
goodness.
Yeah, we found the clothes. They were thrown back over there in the woods. So we got those clothes on over all of that molasses and chicken feed. And we got out on the highway, some road, I don't know the name of it, don't remember. And of course there was nobody in sight for hours. So we started walking toward town. And a truck came along about daylight. And I think we all had an 8 o'clock class, but of course we didn't make that class.
I don't think so.
I think I soaked in the tub for 2 hours, 3 hours. to get all that stuff
Why
out.
didn't you get in the lake and wash off?
Well, we wanted to get on
Probably
home,
winter
I
time.
guess. Well, I think it was fall, I believe. I don't think it was real cold, but it
Yes,
wasn't hot either.
Yeah.
That was some experience that I'll never forget. But we were kind of a welcoming group, and I enjoyed that part of it, of
Yeah.
course. Oh, my goodness.
Well, this could go on for
How do
hours
we
and hours.
remember all this
What?
at our age? How can we remember all of this?
You can
Isn't
remember.
that amazing that we
Yeah.
remember these
Well,
stories?
it is. It just keeps coming back. The more you,
But it's true for all of us, no matter how long ago or more recent our experience is, it all comes flooding back.
it does.
And as I said to my friend Harder, I said, you know, Harder, we could make this up and nobody'd know any different.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, now, all I've told Elizabeth is the truth.
So I know it. I am not questioning.
I
your
could make up a
veracity.
few things. I had an aunt that lived to be about 95, and she lived alone. In fact, I'm named for her husband, my mother's brother, Wilbur, Crafton Chapman. And she would tell me, I called her every morning because I have people calling me now. And I call them because we need to check on each other
Good idea.
when we
Yes.
live alone. And she said, if you don't know any news, you make up some.
Right, don't be calling me up with no good news.
That's easy to do.
That's fun.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, this has been delightful, you two.
Oh, this has been fun.
Enormously.
Oh,
I hope you have, and if we think up enough else to talk about, we'll go again. How's that?
Well,
sounds
now,
good.
that would be some more fun, but I don't know whether anybody would want us to say anything. Now, Elizabeth, we might have to make up that next session.
yes.
Well, we might as
You
well
want us to start working on it?
get busy right now, and really our results will be up to Mickey, because whatever the photographer decides to reproduce is what we end up with, and the rest of it ends up who knows where.
Now,
Yes.
which theater is this going to
Yes,
show? Is it going to be at midnight?